Monday at 8 p.m. is a New Chika Inabuka Draw Your Name event. If you ever wanted to learn what your name is in Amharic and how to write it in Amharic letters, New Chika Inabuka will be here for you to not just teach you, but help you internalize it by providing painting materials so that you can create a beautiful painting with your name. It's fun and educational, and you'll have a painting at the end that you can take home to remember what you learned. This is a ticketed event. Tickets are $35, and you can get them here or when you arrive online at sankofa.com. Tuesday night at 8 p.m., we have the Artivism Jam Session, which is a group of young musicians, instrumentalists, and singers who get together every week to make music together and to invite the community to join them. It's a really unique type of open mic event. It's very dynamic and interesting, and that's at 8 p.m. every Tuesday. Friday night from 6:30 to 8:30 is a discussion of the workbook, Strengths of the Black Family, Lifting and Affirming the Strengths of Black Families by Elder Michael D. Campbell and Eldris Jackie Campbell, who have decades of experience as Black family empowerment coaches rooted in African spirituality. Saturday night at 6:30 p.m., scholar and poet Robert Coles will be here presenting his memoir, Pursuing Alexander Pushkin. The memoir begins with his student years at Lincoln University in Pennsylvania, where he discovered Pushkin during the Black arts movement in the early 1970s. Coles describes how Pushkin's African race pride and literary achievements influenced his own work and gave him much needed inspiration to keep writing. And he also details how Pushkin, despite his Russian background, shares an existential consciousness with African American people. Next Sunday morning at 3 p.m., we have a discussion with poet Bethlehem Bekele Beledichu on her new book, A Poetic Journey Through the Lessons, Revelations, and Moments of Clarity Discovered During One of the Most Difficult Seasons of Her Life. And next Sunday at 7 p.m., we have Gaza on Our Mind, part of our bi-weekly On Our Mind series, where we address ourselves through art, music, and conversation to the struggles against colonial and neo-colonial imperialistic violence in Gaza, Sudan, Congo, and Haiti. We'll have a pair of poets from Iran and Palestine, film presentations, and more. If you'd like to perform, or you know somebody who would, this is a space designed for you to come and show your solidarity with these struggles through your art, and you can sign up to perform by talking to me or Maritu at the desk anytime during or after this event. There are plenty more amazing events already scheduled for this month, and you can learn more about that by signing up for the newsletter so you get a regular digest of these events, and you can also learn more on the events page at sankofa.com. Now, today, we are here for the first event in our three-part Politics of Kenya series, Colonial Kenya. This broader discussion has been made imperative by the continual contemporary involvement of Kenya under the William Ruto administration as an imperialist weapon both on the African continent and in the Caribbean, as well as the repression and oppression of the Kenyan people at home, which have been brought to the attention of the world again recently by the second round of major Gen Z protests against Ruto's government. Our goal is to develop a thorough understanding of the progress of Kenyan politics to this point in order to truly comprehend the circumstances we find ourselves with today. And this first discussion will lay the foundation as our guests explore the lasting impact of British colonial rule, examining land, resistance, and the roots of the modern Kenyan state. Coming to the stage to introduce herself and our panelists, please welcome Sister Wanjiru Gitai. Wanjiru, please. Wanjiru has been one of our most illuminating partners in our journey to develop and present a clear vision, and we're grateful for her leadership this evening. Wanjiru.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to the Sankofa. Thank you, Haile. Thank you, Jordan. Thank you, Maritu. Thank you, Abel. Thank you to everyone and the members of the 625 movement, which is a movement formed to honor the lives that have been lost since the Ruto regime. And we really appreciate this space. So before I introduce the panelists, I'm gonna teach you something. So I'm gonna say Harambe, you say Pan-African. So Harambe means uniting or pulling together. Okay, so let's try this exercise. Harambe, Pan-African. Okay, I need something stronger than that. Harambe, Pan-African. Thank you. All right, so we have four panelists today. Our first panelist is Joy Nampaso. She is a member of the 625 movement. And our speakers will be Moftat, who is an ecologist with expertise in agriculture, nutrition, and natural resource management. He holds a background in rangeland management, physical land resources, and agroecology. His work applies ecological principles to improve food systems and promote sustainable resource use. Moftat has operated in diverse global contexts, bringing a multidisciplinary lens to development. Currently, he leads stakeholders' engagement to advance food security through sustainable agriculture and intensification. He will be joining us through virtually. Our other guest is Ali Badawy. If you can wave to the crowd, he's already here. He's a Kenyan-American civic educator, political commentator, and the host of the One Mic Show, a popular diaspora platform exploring Kenyan and African socio-political issues. He has moderated hundreds of conversations with influential voices in politics, activism, and culture. With roots in Kenya and a base in the DC area, he brings a transnational perspective to his work. His focus is on civic engagement, historical accountability, and making complex issues accessible to African diaspora communities. Ali is known for his sharp analysis, principled stance, and commitment to centering people in political discourse. Dr. Milton Nyakundi is our third panelist. He's a seasoned expert in journalism, communications, and media with over 20 years of experience across broadcast, printing, and digital platforms. He is a vocal advocate for good governance, democracy, social justice, and media freedom in Kenya. He played a key role in reforming the Kenya Broadcasting Corporation, KBC, and was instrumental in exposing and dismantling corruption leadership within Football Kenya Federation in 2024. Known for speaking truth to power, Dr. Nyakundi defends public interest through advocacy and litigation. He is also a man of faith, grounded in values of integrity, humility, honesty, and accountability. I will invite our panelists to the stage. And yes, and Lena. Joy.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to need the slides. How do I connect these? It's very tight. Okay, as I set up my slides, I'll do a quick introduction. My name is Joy Nampaso. I was born and raised in Kenya and have been in the US for the past 6 years. And I work with Valentine as part of the 625 organization, inspired by the bravery of Kenyan youths who poured into the streets last year in 2024. I must admit I was not very politically awake before then. I kind of was existing in limbo until that happened, and that began my awakening of trying to understand our politics and how it's actively affecting our lives and our futures. And that's how we got involved with Valentine, planning protests here in the DC area at the Kenyan Embassy and also at the International Monetary Fund. Hopefully you can get this to work. I'm going to start with a short presentation to give us the context of the colonial period of Kenya, which lasted from 1920 when Kenya became a colony up to 1963 when we got our independence. I'm going to do my best to cover the major highlights so you have a full understanding of the journey before we open up to a more focused discussion by our panelists. Ali will be talking about the border contestations and the challenges that came with these false borders that the British put on African communities. Dr. Milton will be Dr. Milton will be talking about the ripple effects of how we are still in that state of neocolonialism that the British left, but we are still under their neck and under the systems that they left behind. Moftat, who is actually in East Africa right now, will be joining us. I think it's 2 a.m. there, but he was very excited to be part of this conversation. We'll be talking a little about land alienation, forced taxation on local communities, and also sharing with us some resources where we can learn more about the cultures and communities that existed before the disruption came in from the British. Okay, I will get started. Hopefully my slides will catch up with me. Okay, so starting with, So starting with Kenya before, perfect. But they have my speaker notes and I don't like that. Okay. Okay, yes, so as I said, Colonial Kenya started 1920. The British had been there a lot earlier, and Kenya had become a British protectorate in 1895, but we officially became a British colony in 1920. The image you're seeing here was taken during the Mau Mau Rebellion. If you're not aware of the Mau Mau Rebellion, this was an armed resistance against colonialism. And one of the ways that the British used to suppress this dissent was mass arrests and detentions. And so you had many Africans who were detained, up to 100,000 at a time, and they underwent a lot of physical and sexual violence. If you were suspected Mau Mau, if you're any of their sympathizers, you would be arrested and put and detained in these camps. So if we step back a little bit, Kenya really did not exist, and Kenya is actually a foreign concept. Before the British, communities, we had tribes, nations, and communities that existed in this part of the continent. This circle you see here is where present-day Kenya would come to be. But before then, in the central part of present-day Kenya, we had communities like the Kikuyus and the Kambas who practice agriculture. As we move closer to Lake Victoria, which is its colonial name, its original name, Namlolwe, you had people that were skilled in making weapons, tools, and jewelry. Different communities also had different ways of organizing themselves politically. Some communities were led by council of elders, others had monarchies led by a king, for example, the Luya. They had their own religions, rites of passage, storytelling. Music was very essential to their life, and elders and spiritual leaders were highly revered. The red arrows on this map are trade routes. My mother's tribe, which is the Kamba, were well-known long-distance traders, so they would move from the central part of Kenya and trade long distances. Yes. So this region had contact with non-African communities or nations. So the coastal part of Kenya, you had trading with the Arabs that started as early as the 7th century all the way to the 19th century. The Swahili communities by the coast. We also had the Portuguese actually colonized the coastal strip of East Africa for about 150 years, all the way from 1600. And we also had explorers coming in around the 1800s. So interaction with non-African communities was not something new to the people of this region. And it's frozen. Okay, so through the work of the explorers who were going through this region at the time, they quickly realized how much wealth and land there was to be acquired. So they decided, the colonial powers, the Germans, the British, the Belgians, that they would much rather sit down and cut Africa like a piece of cake without involving any Africans, so they can avoid any sorts of wars between themselves. So in the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885, they all sat together and split the African continent without Africans' input. And so if I have a very helpful map that will show. So the European powers divided Africa without any African input. Britain claimed present-day Kenya as its protectorate, and so Kenya became an East African protectorate in 1885. And the British began taking administrative control of Kenya at that time. So the first thing they wanted to do was figure out how can they move resources. They now have this territory. They've been legally allowed to take this territory. How can they start moving resources inland? So they started by building the Uganda Railway from 1896 to 1901. Fun fact is that this railway, I don't know if it's fun, it's just a fact, it's not fun. So the railway was actually built by Indian labor. So the British Empire, India was a British empire at the time, and so they got about 32,000 laborers from India to come and build the Uganda Railway. So these workers faced very difficult conditions, and one of the more famous recollections of this is a book known as The Man-Eaters of Savo. This is a book that documents 2 lions that terrorized the Indian workers and murdered over 30 workers while they were building this railway. These lions were actually tracked and captured, and they actually sit in a museum in Chicago, which is very random. So if you want to see the lions, you can fly to Chicago and you'll see the lions that terrorized these Indian workers while they were building the railway more than 200 years ago. Is it 200? Yeah, they're in Chicago. It's very random. And while the British were taking over, they had preference. So they would take over the fertile land and displace communities and push them to reserves, which were the drier, unproductive lands. And they would use treaties, which I would call deception, because they would find a way to take 10,000, 20,000 acres for almost nothing. So you can't really call that a treaty. It's very deceptive. back on that point, actually, on the Indians, I forgot to mention. So some of those Indians went back to India, but some of those Indians actually remained in Kenya. So we have a very good, sizable community of Indians that live in Kenya. And in 2017, they were actually recognized as the 44th tribe in Kenya. So they have contributed immensely to Kenya's economy and Kenya's culture. So the British have come in, they're taking land, they're taking it deceptively, they're pushing Africans to drier, more unproductive areas, and they're also forcing Africans to work on their farms. So they would push people away, tell them they have to pay tax, and the only way they can pay the tax is by working on their farms. So they get free labor and they get money. It's a win-win situation for them. So there are communities that resisted this invasion, and the first person I'm going to mention is, his name was Colonial Arab Samoei, and he was the political and spiritual leader of the Nandi community. He resisted the British building the railway on their territory and actually led an 11-year resistance against the British, which is one of the longest and the fiercest resistance in history. In 1905, they lured him into what they were calling peace negotiations, but once him and his team showed up, they shot him at point-blank range, effectively ending the Nandi resistance in 1905. We also have a woman named Moftat Ngugi. She is part of the Giriama community and also led her community to fight against land alienation, punitive taxes, and forced labor. And what they did for her is they arrested her and exiled her on the opposite side of the country. And at that time, with the state of transportation, you were basically in a different world, completely removed from your people. And that was in 1913 to 1914. Also have Harry Thuku. Harry Thuku was one of the first political activists in Kenya, and he was fighting to have Africans included in the political governance of the country. So when they came in and started running the country. Oh, yay, I have some slides. Okay, so this is the railway. Clearly, these are Indian people who are working on the railway. This is the book. I don't know if you want to read about people being mauled by lions, but if you're interested, that is the book that documents that whole experience. And it has been written, of course, by a colonial officer, so that perspective is going to be very, very limited. Yes, so depicted at the top, this is Colonial Arab Samoei. He was the leader of the Nandi resistance who was assassinated when he was lured for alleged peace negotiations. It was actually a planned assassination. This is a statue of Moftat Ngugi, who was arrested and exiled for leading the Giriama community to fight against British invasion. And this was Harry Thuku. Harry Thuku, as I mentioned, was one of the first political activists. He was fighting to have Africans included in the governance of the country. And he was arrested in 1921, and people went on the streets to fight against his arrest. And the British officers opened fire on peaceful protesters, killing about 100 people for coming out to protest his arrest. He was exiled in Somalia, which is another country still in East Africa. But as you can see, protesting is an integral part of the Kenyan political space. We've been protesting since inception of Kenya as a state itself. The Mau Mau uprising. The Mau Mau uprising from 1952 to 1960. This was an armed resistance consisting of the Kikuyu, Embu, and Meru fighters. This is 30 years after Kenya became a colony in 1920. And it was led by Dedan Kimathi, top right, and Field Marshal Muthoni. This is her, and this is her. So this is her. She passed away in 2023. So this just a reminder of how recent this history is. And when she passed away, she died poor, with no kind of protection and no kind of reparations, not from the British and not even from our own Kenyan government. This is a statue of Dedan Kimathi that sits in the streets of Nairobi today. And my slide here does not do justice the kind of brutal suppression that these fighters went through while they were fighting in the forests. Sexual violence, detention, executions for families, sympathizers, and anyone who they believed was supporting the Mau Mau cause. Another very sad fact is that in Kenya right now, if you have dreadlocks, you are profiled as a criminal, which is very, very sad considering this was the signature hair for the people who fought for the freedoms of our country. You can see the remnants of colonial conditioning in the police today. And only 2 years ago, we had 2 young boys who had dreadlocks and were murdered on the assumption that they were criminals because they had locks in their hair. I'm gonna go back a little bit. So this is during the partition of Africa. Kenya, present-day Kenya, fell under the British. You can see how they partitioned the rest of Africa, Tanzania being under the Germans, Portuguese, Belgian Congo. Ali just reminded me of a very interesting story, that there was a time, just to show how artificial these borders are, that the Kenyan vice president we had a Kenyan vice president called Mudi Awori, and his biological brother was a member of parliament in Uganda. So same tribe, same community, split by artificial borders, now in the government of other countries, which is a very, very, it's not something you would see in other places. So I have an interesting video. So for those people who don't know, Kenya went into the streets last year in June 2024. And that's actually where organization gets its name from, June 25th. And they were going to the streets to fight against the punitive finance bill. They were going to increase taxes to incredulous amounts, which would raise the cost of living for regular Kenyans in insurmountable amounts. People went into the streets. A lot of young people lost their lives. And it has become a tradition now, every year, to go into the streets. Now it's bigger than the finance bill. It's now about poor governance. So this year came around, and right before the protests this year, there's a video that went viral of a young man right before the protest speaking to the statue of Dedan Kimathi that sits in the streets of Nairobi. It's a reminder that their courage still lives on in the young generation, and that we will continue to pass it on to future generations. So another fact is that when Dedan Kimathi was arrested, the British never shared where his body was buried. So his body is lost, and the community was never able to grieve him and to bury him. So, and that's information that the British have never shared with the Kenyan people. The road to independence. So Kenya got its independence in 1963, and this was a culmination of different factors. We have the violent revolts, like the one I just spoke of. We also had rising nationalist leaders like Jomo Kenyatta, who would be Kenya's first president. Oginga Odinga, whose son is very, very famous in Kenya's political scene. And Tom Mboya, who was actually assassinated in 1969. So we had a wave of Kenyan leaders, African leaders, who were demanding for independence. We also had a post-World War II economic decline and a global wave of decolonization. Kenya got its independence in 1963 and officially became a republic in 1964. Recently, there is a lot of discourse on the transition of power for when the colonizers left and when African rule began. A lot of people, and this is something we'll cover in the second section of our trilogy, on why Jomo Kenyatta was seen as a successor who would take over Kenya. It is common conversation that they wanted a leader who would protect their investments and interests even after they had left the country. They wanted someone who would not violently take away the land that they had occupied. And so it made the transition easier. They would still be in power, but not in power, right? Kenya would look like it had independence, but it was still under the neck of the neo-colonizers to this day. Anyone interested in learning more? I have some recommendations that were graciously shared by the panel. I have a star on the fourth one because it's a very strange book. John Boyce, King of the Wakikuyu. He is a white British man who came into Kenya and gave himself the title King of the Wakikuyu. So I don't know how he got to that point, but that's according to him. Don't buy the book, don't give him the sales, but just know something like that exists, and it will give you an eye into the kind of supremacist mindset that these people had. I also have some documentary recommendations. British Colonialism in Kenya takes a deeper look into the inhumane torture that the British used to suppress dissent in Kenya. And another very interesting video is we still have settlers in Kenya who never left, and they own a lot of land, and this is one of them. My family paid nothing for 10,000 acres of land in Kenya. So if you want to hear about that, this is on YouTube as well. Thank you all so much. I wanted to give just a quick, a lot happened during this period of time, but I wanted to place you guys in the context of the Kenyan story. Our panelists are gonna have a more focused discussion. Not sure if Moftat is connected online, but he will be talking about specifically land tax, hut tax. If you had a cow, you had to pay tax. It was insane. So he's gonna go more into that, share some resources. I'm gonna put them up right now because I'm not sure if we're gonna be able to share the screen while he's on Zoom. So I'm just gonna put a plug for this. Joy Adamson was a British woman who started painting African tribes in the 1930s, and so she has very beautiful watercolors of different communities if you wanted to check that out. Also, Google has a collaboration with the National Museums of Kenya where you can look at the different communities, the Tharaka, the Kuria, the Tugen, the Luo. These are the communities that make up Kenya. We have 42 different tribes. Yes, thank you. That's all I have. Thank you so much for listening.
Oh, okay, so that, okay. Okay, thank you very much. As we wait for Moftat to get connected, Moftat is actually going to be presenting from Nairobi, Kenya. He's actually awake. I think it's about 3 a.m. in Kenya, 3 a.m. in Kenya. I'm not 100% sure. Okay, and yeah, so as we wait for him, again, my name is Ali Badawi. I've been in the DMV area for quite a number of years. I've lost count. This is a very interesting presentation that was made by Joy. You know, like, I've seen many presentations before, and it's amazing. Every time a presentation is made, there's new emotions that come up. It's never new. These are stories that we've had from when we were very young. We went through an education system that was inherited from the British colonizer, and a lot of facts were whitewashed. So some of the information that you're going to be hearing today, actually, a lot of Kenyans do not have this information. Whenever I dig up, and do more reading, there's always new things that I discover. Like, part of what I'm going to be covering includes the artificial borders that we have today. These nice, beautiful borders that you see are very interesting. Joy mentioned that at some point, Kenya had a vice president, Moody Awori, who had a blood brother, father and mother, who was a member of parliament in Uganda. And which begs the question, how does that happen? These are blood brothers, like same family, but I guess where the line was drawn, where the brother owned land and where the other brother had land, ended up being two different countries. And this is the story of most Africans. If you come to the northern part of Kenya, the northeastern part of Kenya, and you meet people from there, a lot of people here in the DMV will even tell them, oh no, you're not Kenyan, because northeastern Kenya is 100% Somali. They speak Somali, they look Somali, but a line was drawn at some point. And these are some of the conversations that we're going to be having today. Just let me know if we can connect Moftat. I'm not sure if he's there. Yeah, so if we can connect Moftat, we can get started with Moftat, and then we're going to continue with the conversation. But I want to thank everyone for coming. I'm really happy to hear what questions you have and how we're going to continue this series. So
Moftat is here. I'm just going to work on this video. We can hear you guys.
okay, all right.
Okay, Moftat, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to be working on putting your image on a projector, but the event has started and you can listen to us, right?
Okay, all right. And as Moftat is getting started, I'm going to give Milton a chance to also introduce himself and say something, and then we're going to go to Moftat. Milton, karibu sana.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I sometimes forget, we throw in Swahili here and there, but hopefully you also get to learn a few Swahili words.
Thank you, Ali. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. Let me say this. First of all, I want to acknowledge a few other people that I see here. My brother Mwaluyu, who ran for presidency in 2022, I believe. I see an artist, my brother Nonini. We go back a long way when I was at KBC in the early 2000s. It's good to see you, but I think what we have seen from here, from Joy, as setting the pace for this event, and I want to get straight into this without having to repeat what Val already went through in terms of the profile and what we have done and what we have been able to stand for over time. it depicts a very interesting, and I would be getting into the detail of this in my presentation. You, for example, have a crisis in between the DRC and Rwanda, where you have a community that has now morphed into something called M23 that is being accused of being Rwandan and not being Congolese. Yet these are just the same people. I have interacted, when you talk about Northeastern, I have been there. And I have interacted with those communities. I've been to the western part of Kenya, and that is the northwestern part of Kenya, where you have the Pokot people, and then you have the northeastern Uganda, where these are the same people. In fact, I have experienced it, where I have a friend, my brother Robin Toskin, that I worked with. He is a Sabaot, and the Sabaot, you have them in Kenya and in Uganda. And for them, this border you have called this Kenya and Uganda does not exist. In fact, with Tegla Lorupe, and I've also worked with the Tegla Lorupe Peace Foundation, we used to go to Makutano in West Pokot, and we are doing this peace race. You have the Karamoja from Uganda, and we have the Pokot from Kenya, and the Turkana up north. And moving between Kenya and Uganda, I've actually crossed those two countries without having to use my passport. Because according to them, I mean, what is this thing you call us, that I can't visit my brother across the border because somebody came and told us that now we belong to two different countries? And you see the same thing when you go to the southern part of the country with the Maasai.
And the Digos too, Kenya and Tanzania, same people across the line.
And so that is the fallacy of what we have come to encounter in modern day Africa. That when we talk about Pan-Africanism, when we talk about being one people, when we talk about the tragedy of the interaction of the colonialists, it is actually something that gives me a lot of pride. And when Val reached out to me and said, we are talking about this, I was like, yeah, this is something I want to speak. Even if it is one person present, we want to begin amplifying this message. And we want to go back, Ali, to the pre-colonial. Yes. The people who fought for Kenya, when Moftat is ready, please prompt me. I'm a broadcaster. I get paid to speak.
Yeah, he's actually ready. He's looking at you.
I was waiting for that prompt, so I would hand it over back to you guys. And Moftat, please take it away.
Yes, am I coming clearly?
Yes, Moftat, take it home for us, Moftat.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you very much, and thank you so much, audience, for joining us. And it is such a privilege to have an opportunity to have this discussion. My name is Moftat Ngugi. I'm actually streaming in from Nairobi, and very excited to talk about this topic. I'm not a historian, I have to say. I'm an ecologist, but this is a very important topic for us as Africans, and I think with the broader diaspora, understanding a lot of the history of what sort of makes the key dynamics of the African continent and most of our countries in this region. So I think and I think that one of the most important things to take away from today is that there is a history and a culture and communities that existed in this region prior to the arrival of the British in 1895 as a protectorate. And in fact, I don't know how many folks know this, but Homo sapiens, our species, is across some of these lands here, linking all the way gorge, like Turkana Boy and other kinds of locations. So this is a region that has been dominated, has fostered the emergence of us as a species and us as human beings that then basically populated the rest of the world. So in some ways, Kenya and this region is really the home of everybody in the world, honestly. But at the same time, we have folks here who have used their lands and participated with various economic systems, highly disrupted through the colonial period. As stated, Kenya became a colony in 1920, but it had already been subdivided as a protectorate for the Berlin Conference that happened in 1884. And prior to that, by the way, we had most of the peopling of Kenya, beginning with prehistoric, the really short people called, some of them called Gumba, and but then also the emergence of multiple Bantu groups that came in, the Kushites that came in from the Somalia side, as well as the Nilotes, the River Lake Nilot, the Plains Nilots, including the Maasai, who came in and people the whole area. Case, I'm very keen that we also get an opportunity to respond to the audience and also have our discussion proceed, informed by maybe people's curiosities about our own individual stories, because a lot of what you might read about in the books is sort of a certain kind of a story told by people who were reading and writing at that time. But for you all to know, we do written by Africans, but which is actually oral. So many of our stories that we tell through stories and song and dance and culture and drama and so on. So we do have a lot of that was under the period that happened with the British coming in here from 1920, and the purpose, the means that they actually took power. So a very insidious approach to forced labor. Basically, once the fighting had been low people resisting the invasion of their lands, there was very, very fierce resistance throughout. You will sometimes hear people say, how come Africa was dominated by Europeans? And the point is that because of some of the technological advantages and some of the trickery as we had in terms of signing something that you think you're doing in good faith, but unfortunately, you know, you're not really kind of getting the deal that you deserve or that you agreed to. We had a lot of trickery going around the basically, let's say, it's the tricks that happen for political leadership to be wrestled out from the hands of Africans, from their own communities. So, and once this happened, then the peopling of Kenya with some Europeans then began, and enforcement of law and enforcement of their power was exercised through guns and through the might of the then British Empire, including imposition of what was known as hat tax, as well as head tax. A hat tax was basically most of the Africans who lived in this community, in this region, had their own systems of their economy, and they traded with each other. But once the British began having their farms and systems in this country, what happened was that Africans weren't interested to go work for them or to do anything in collaboration with them. But they then found a way to say that every household that has a hat had to pay a tax, and if you don't have the tax, you're arrested, and by force, and a lot of conflicts happened like that. And then the other way that they controlled a lot of the African populations was also through a head tax for each livestock that each animal that you had to pay a tax on it. And because then you didn't have the money, the British money, people were then forced basically to go to work for British to get the tax to pay, to get the money to pay the tax in currency. And so that was one of the key ways that the British then end up wrestling control and then forming a political system that excluded Africans And this is part of what then ultimately led to the political clamoring for participation of Africans in their own self-determination, which really only culminated once we got independence after very fierce Mau resistance, among others, in the country. But let me also hand over to my co-panelists, and also maybe, I don't know when we'll get our Q&As, to also bring in the audience and others. Over to you, Ali.
All right, thank you so much, Moftat. Like very interesting conversation from Moftat. Heart tucks, head tucks. These are things that sound like they're from a storybook, but these are actual events that happened on a people who are subjugated. If you come back to the United States today, if someone who's never known about the United States was brought here, they would never see any evidence that this was previously Native American or Indian country. There's no evidence. That was the plan that the British had for Kenya. Remember, out of all the lands that the British occupied in Africa, in the southern parts, in the eastern part, and in the western parts, there were only 3 countries where they settled, because the British typically tended to pick the best places for themselves. Those 3 countries are Kenya, Zimbabwe, and South Africa. And that's the reason why Kenya is very unique in its history. Our brothers in Tanzania across the border are always, they will always tell you that you guys are always, rogue and rowdy, like, why don't you just listen to your leaders? You're always protesting, you're always, like fighting, demanding for this and that. So the difference between these 2 countries, they were both British colonies, we were neighbors, but the British did not settle in Tanzania, so they were just sending administrators there. But in Kenya, they dispossessed people land and occupied it. So from the presentation that was made by Joy, you will see that the British were already in Africa well before Kenya became a colony, because it initially became a protectorate in 1895, and then it became a colony in 1920. And I think it's important to distinguish between the two, because they're sometimes confused. A colony indicates full control. It indicates that this is property of the British Empire. So it happened in succession, because the people who came before, they were missionaries. And before the missionaries, there were these people who were given nice names, like Christopher Columbus. Remember, I'm sure most of you are familiar with who Christopher Columbus is. And he's been very celebrated in American history as just someone who came to explore and see what's in this other side of the world, and have a good time with the people who are there. That's what most people, until fairly recently, knew about Christopher Columbus. It's the same thing in Kenya. There were people who came as explorers. I have a very interesting story in that the high school that I went to in Kenya was formerly a British school. It was built by the British for the British, because the British had planned to settle forever in Kenya. This was one, for those who are familiar, for the Kenyans who are here, they know about Lenana School. Lenana School, before the name, the Lenana School is named after Alaibon, a Maasai chief. And this is one of the chiefs who was also deceived by the British. Before the name Lenana School, the school was called Duke of York. And it's in Nairobi. This school is it's still there, still a major school until today. We had another school which was our major rival called Nairobi School. It was called the Prince of Wales. So all these schools had their names. And attending that school now, looking back, there was still, more than 40 years after independence, there was still presence of the fact that this was a white school before. So the names of all the houses were the units where people used to live and stay, the quarters where you would stay. So the names of all the houses were British names. So the house that I was in later was named after the former President Mwai Kibaki. It was called Thompson. There was another house that was called Lugard. There's another house that was called Speak. All these people were explorers who came in, explorers, I'll put that in quotes, who came in to look and assess what's happening in Kenya, to go and report back to the British throne. So these names were changed after we got independence, but when you go back to the school and even look at the pictures, you will notice that the school until the 70s still had white presence. The British, I would say, in Kenya, they actually got a very good deal. Like when Kenya was getting independence. They were not forced to pack up and leave one day. They were given time. And that's to the argument that Joy was bringing out on Jomo Kenyatta. Like, did the British see him as a safe pair of hands who's going to guard their interests? Because in Kenya's inaugural cabinet, we had white cabinet secretaries. That's a fact that even a lot of Kenyans don't know. We had, British people who are still operating various ministries, who are permanent secretaries. And when you look at the school, Lenana School, when you look at the pictures, because when you go around, you see all pictures, until the 70s, you can still see white teachers, you can still see white students, meaning they were given time to live. And of course, there were settlers who stayed back, but a majority of them left. And there was a reason, the most recent picture that I got was the 1982, was either 1982 or 1983 rugby team that still had a British rugby coach. Lenana School was very famous for rugby. So that's just part of how personal this gets. As far as the borders are concerned, it is a very, very sad story. Like when you go across the different borders of Kenya, and Milton mentioned a couple of them, like if you go to Western Kenya, if you go to Northeastern happens to be one of the most interesting parts. We have, it's actually one of the biggest land masses of Kenya, and it is 100% Somali. There was an interesting thing that happened pre-independence. The British went there and did a referendum and asked the people there, would you like to be part of Kenya? Because the Northern Frontier District was being administered separately from the rest of the colony. So they were asked, do you want to be part of Kenya, or do you want to join your brothers across the border in Somalia? And it was fairly obvious, because that part of Somalia, the Mogadishu part of Somalia is another interesting story, because the northern part was colonized by the British, and the southern part that borders Kenya was Italian occupied. So they were being asked, do you want to join this to be part of the greater Somalia, or do you want to be part of Kenya? And anyone would do, they would want to join their people. So that referendum went overwhelmingly to they want to join Somalia, but for one reason or another, the British did not want that. So there was a war that happened in Kenya in the 60s called the Shifta Wars that lasted post-independence, where Kenya now was forcefully keeping this part of Somaliland, and Somalia was also trying to get this part. For those who've been following Kenyan news recently, the Somali people have now been given the opportunity to get Kenyan IDs without vetting, which is another very sad story. Somali people, since the 60s, they had to be vetted to confirm if they're true bona fide Kenyans or if they're not. Until fairly recently, that had not been changed, and it was very difficult for them to get identification. If you move to coastal Kenya, so coastal Kenya wasn't part of the Kenya colony, the Kenyan map as we see today. It was part of the Sultanate of Zanzibar. So in 1963, there was a treaty that was signed with the Sultan of Zanzibar to give Kenya a coastal strip. So in Kenya today, we have what's called the Qadhi's courts, which are special Muslim courts. And a lot of Kenyans sometimes ask, how come Muslims are getting this special treatment? But it was part of the agreement that the Sultan of Zanzibar made with Jomo Kenyatta and the British, that there are certain rights that you're going to grant to Muslim people for us to give you this coastal line. And these border wars or these border stories, they are across all the different borders. I'm going to give an opportunity to Milton to come in and explain this a bit further. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Moftat and Ali, for the great introduction. I want to begin, and just before I say something, allow me to, the only thing that Val did not do is to say something, because I don't allow people to do that. Allow me to do this, that I did not come alone. I am accompanied by my beautiful wife. She's seated at the back there. Her name is Julia, so when you see her, please recognize her in that way. Like I said, I already recognized my brother Mwaluyu and Nonini. It's a great pleasure to speak here tonight. Allow me to say this. Kaluyu. Sorry. Allow me to say this. The subject that I want to bring is to connect the way the British broke into the country, what impact that had, and how we still live with the effect of that interaction. And this is quite an interesting bit. And at the very tail end of this, I'm going to create that connection between what happened in the independence clamor across Africa and why it is important for us to engage with the Gen Z generation in Kenya in their push. Because I want to give you a quick sample. All the leaders of the independence push in Africa were all under 40 years. We only had a few outliers in Jomo Kenyatta, in Leopold Sedar Senghor, in I think Modibo Keita, and a few others. But if you look at Mwalimu Julius Nyerere, 1922, if you look at Nelson Mandela, 1918, you look at Kwame Nkrumah, 1915. You look at, so they were all either in their late 20s, you talk about early 30s, and a few of them who were more than 40. So the Gen Z, those kids and our younger siblings, I'm a millennial, they are in their right space, and we need to encourage them that when they are pushing, you know, for example, Tom Mboya in Kenya, who through airlift program, Obama's father came to America to study in the 50s, was actually 29 by the time he was doing all this. So really, this is their space. So let me get into this. How did the British get into Kenya? One, they did something called, and this is very interesting, we still see this happening today. They used something called taking advantage of the tribal divisions. The fact that we've talked about Kenya having 42 different ethnic groups, they took advantage of that. So they then extracted those divisive ethnic lines, which were never a problem, by the way, before they arrived, and they started to remind our people that, you know, you're Luo, you're Kikuyu, you're Griema, you're this or the other thing. That's the first thing they did. And then they went ahead to deploy this divide and rule policy, where now they were favoring some people and, you know, over others. That is what led us to our people warming up to some of them. They also use collaborators, and I think this is a major strategy that worked for them, where then they identified certain individuals who they appointed as chiefs, others paramount chiefs, and they made them to believe that you know, when you collaborate with us, and Joy talked about kingdoms like the Luya, we have a famous Luya kingdom where the king or the monarch of that system actually used his own soldiers and warriors to fight alongside the British against Kenyans who were fighting colonization. I don't want to mention names, but you know who those leaders were. And then this is what created a system where those who were loyal to the British were given preferential treatment to access education, to access certain privileges like appointments, you know, the soft life that we talk about, and that is how they warmed up to them. So they divided our people along those lines and dangling, you know, some good things. But then let's talk about how the system then impacted our people. One was cultural, where they then came up with this thing that bastardized everything that we had, where they told us that our religion, our traditional practices were backward, and our education system was not appropriate, and they started westernizing us. They told us that if you believe, like the Maasai had their god, they defined as Enkai. They told our people in Kisii that Nyasaye was Engoro was not a god. Then they told the Gikuyu that your god is inferior to the god that we came with, and that westernization again saw our people warm up to them. But I think there is one thing that is still tragic to date. The aspect of introducing Christianity and missionaries who came with the Bible, yet they collaborated and worked very closely with the British colonial system to show our people that these are not bad, and used that to then radicalize them, shift the religious beliefs of our people, so that through that, they then found their way into that. And then the other level of impact was the economic one, which has been talked about. They introduced and entrenched a colonial system of economics, where then our people were told that what you believed, the indigenous trading systems that our people had, was inferior. So for them to again get into this, they introduced the tax, and then they, you know, introduced ordinances that took away the main factor of production, which is the land. They appropriated and allocated themselves that land, the fertile one. By the way, close to 80% of Kenyan land is arid or semi-arid. So the 20% that is arable is what they allocated the settlers. Joy recommended that video, 10,000 acres given to a family for free. And that is what they exploited. So that once our people were deprived of that land, they were then subjected to harsh working conditions so that they can satisfy the tax regime. And I think there's a whole history that goes into that, and some of the things are really deep that we may not exhaust in one sitting. So out of this, they then got our people into slavery, if you like. This is your land that has been taken away from you. You've been, you know, everything you believed in has been bastardized and given a bad name. And suddenly our people believed that everything that we inherited from our ancestry was all clownish and wrong. It is therefore there is a God that is going to burn you in hell if you're fighting. And then they amplified this message from the Bible that if somebody slaps you on the right, turn your cheek on the other side and they slap you. And that is what gave our people that kind of blackmail, to believe that, okay, they have come, let us allow them. And then my grandmother used to tell me something about a certain community that if, and I've had it in northern Kenya where they say that a camel, if a camel comes in and they ask you that I need some space so that I can shelter my head from the rain, I don't mind if the rest of the body is being rained on. You allow the camel, they would come in and then they will start telling you, it's getting cold, can I get my hump in, and then I will not mind if the rest of the body, and you know how the story goes on and on and on. And that is exactly what happened. But allow me now to get to the last part of what were the consequences of this and how has it continued to play out. So what happened is that now they created a system, a colonial system of economics where the factor of production has been taken away. Then they told our people, again, I'm going to use the word bastardize so many times because that's what they did. They even told us, again, this is like on production and the effect that we still suffer today. They told us because they had interest in our coffee and our tea, they now created a biased focus on those products for export, and told us that if you grow this more, you're going to make more money. So they bastardized our indigenous crops like sorghum. They tried others like rubber. It never worked because there was no immediate demand, and the numbers were not adding up. And so now our people started focusing. The highlands of Kenya, they started growing more tea and more coffee. And then remember, they had allocated themselves a lot of land, so they went into it. The white settlers were producing that in large quantities and exporting and making more money. And then our people now started abandoning the indigenous crops and produce that they used to do, and therefore they introduced corn, as you know it here, or maize, as I grew up calling it. And then we were told that if you're growing maize, this is what you're likely to get. It is better than your sorghum and others. That is how then they controlled the economy now, by creating that false belief in this export produce. What was the effect, and how has post-colonial Kenya then hangovered itself? Moftat and Ali have spoken about that we have a system where those who took over at independence, in quotes, then became gatekeepers of the colonialists. And I'm going to tell you how that continues to play out shortly. What they did is that they exploited the ethnic divisions that were there, the kingpins. That is why today you have politicians who tell you, I am so-and-so, do not touch certain parts of the country because that is my area. And that is what has continued to be exploited in the political system, where people are still being told that unless you have a kingpin or somebody at the table, you do not have development, you do not have healthcare, you do not have all this, because they have carried on with that hangover. The other thing that has been done is that there is legislative carry-ons from the colonial system, including the land ordinances. Let me ask you, for instance, do you know that in Kenya today we have something called the Witchcraft Act, which is being applied to again bastardize some cultural practices and beliefs? And the state, the extractive state system, is being used. My community suffered from that in, I think, sometime in the 2010s, 2007, 2008, where we were told that the community was banning witches. I'm sure many of you saw those stories being aired. We have something called the Penal Code. We have something called the county government bylaws, that despite having the Constitution of Kenya 2010 that has the most elaborate freedoms under the Bill of Rights in Chapter 4, you still apply the Penal Code, which was created, and we've seen how it has been weaponized against people coming out in the streets. We've seen how the streets are being blocked. We have seen how people are losing their property because despite having the Land Act of 2012 and other land laws subject to Chapter 5 of the Constitution of Kenya 2010, we still have reference to the Land Ordinance of 1915, and which was revised in 1920, that is still being used, where somebody tells you that they had a leasehold for land for 99 years or 999 years, and the people cannot have access to land. We have conservancies in the country, which today, the conversation we are bringing out is that, why do you have these conservancies and you're told you cannot access them? What we have discovered today is that they are used to exploit our natural and mineral resources, which are being shipped out of the country from those conservancies, because somebody has 10,000 acres and they tell you that they are the only ones who know how to take care of elephants and lions in that space, and the rest of us can have no such ability. Yet our forefathers lived with these animals over these years. And today we are being told about wildlife-human conflict in a manner that our forefathers never documented. I've lived with the Maasais, for example, who know how to tame lions. I mean, what happened? So those are the things that are playing out even today in a way that is extractive and continues to exploit our people. The last point I want to speak about is about leadership and governance, and how the leadership that we have today is benefiting and continues to gatekeep for the colonial system that was there. And this again is something that we can talk until the chicken come home to roost. But I want to say this. We have a constitution that, just like those who believe in the Bible, we are told that when Jesus was crucified and he resurrected on the cross, that all our sins were wiped and we no longer need intermediaries to access God. I want to say this. The 2010 Constitution midwifed that freedom, that access. And we have no reason to have a leadership that today tells us that the only way for us to get development, and we have some, with all due respect, we have some below average people who call themselves members of parliament, who still believe that for you to get development for your people, you have to pay homage to some individual at State House who has no respect for human rights. That for you to get access to education, the only way you're going to do it is to pay homage to an individual who has no track record of standing for anything. That the only thing our healthcare system is going to work is if we allow somebody to bring down a system that was working and required just a few areas to fix. But now, like they say, if it's not broken, don't fix it. But now somebody comes because they want to entrench themselves, they tell you we had to undo all this. And at the end of the day, what we are having is that system that has continued to be extractive. And the only way out for us, as I conclude my statement, so that I'm not long, like I said, I get paid to speak, so I can speak until tomorrow. What the impact and the overall effect of the colonial system and the interaction that our people had is that we still have a few collaborators who are gatekeeping for the system, and they do not want to undo that system, because the moment they undo, their rent-seeking endeavors are done and completely destroyed. That is why they are deploying those old colonial systems against the people, despite the people having said that we are tired, we want to fix it, we want to undo that system, we want to define our own structure that works, and going back to the beginnings. So the last point is on the Gen Zs and why we need to encourage them to continue doing what they are doing. The spirit of Pan-Africanism and the sentiments of Kwame Nkrumah and Mwalimu Julius Nyerere and others is that age is not a factor when you're fighting for your freedom and for your country. What we must continue to encourage is that our people must pull together regardless of the age, regardless of background. Our people need to pull together, and Pan-Africanism must be more alive today than it was 60, 65 years ago when Africa got her independence from the British. The gatekeepers of the colonial system must be jinxed and exorcised from our system. Wafukuzwe, they have to be sent away like Muslims would deal with a pig inside a mosque. Thank you very much. Let me stop.
Thank you so much. A round of applause for Milton tafadhali. Thank you so much, Milton. We now want to open this up to the floor because this should be more of an interactive session, especially to people maybe who are coming into contact with Kenyan history, maybe for the first time, or maybe you've had interest in it. You want to get perspective from people who are still living through the aftermath. But one quick thing I want to add to what Milton said is that things that are happening today, which is why history is very important, things that are happening today within the Kenyan political space have a relation to the history and what happened over time. So when we get to the independence period, Milton mentioned collaborators, and these are known people. These families are known until today, and of course we're not going to be mentioning any names or shaming anyone, but they're well known. And because they're the ones who were given the privilege of education during the colonial period, so when we got independence, those who fought for independence, the Mau Mau, they were told, because you guys were in the jungle, you don't know how to read and write, we're going to take care of this, and then eventually we're going to redistribute land. So the people who are the collaborators, the people who are working with the British to subjugate fellow Africans, are the ones who got into positions of power. Their children and their grandchildren are still in positions of power to today. So what that did to the Kenyan political system, it kind of, over time, or throughout the whole period, it rewarded the people who are collaborators. It rewarded the people who were against the people. Like even when we look at Kenya's new constitution, Kenya's new constitution came with blood. So the bloodshed did not stop in the period before independence. There was another very big, another Gen Z uprising. It wasn't Gen Z, of course, then. In the late 80s, coming to the early 90s, when when President Daniel Arap Moi had declared Kenya a one-party state. So there's the famous 7th of July, Sabasaba, where so many people were killed in the clamor for multi-partyism in Kenya. And as the political process went, the people who tend to be rewarded are those that worked with collaborators. The 2010 Constitution came through bloodshed. Those who got rewarded after the 2010 Constitution are the people who opposed it. And of course, we're not in a name mentioning session today, but we just want people to understand that everything that happened from that time has an impact until today. And I want to open this up to the floor, maybe to anyone who has a question, anyone who has a statement or wants to say anything about the presentation today. Let's go ahead. Do we have another? There's a microphone there. Okay, we're going to start with him, and then we're going to come to the lady up front here. So maybe just tell us your name, where you're from, and talk to us.
Yeah, hi, my name is Daniel. I'm from Nairobi, but I live here in DC now. I'm curious, there are a lot of West African countries that were, francophone, quote unquote, that still are under the influence of the French, and to the extent where the currency is still linked to the French currency. For Kenya, where are we in terms of the British having a lot of control in the country? Are we at the point where now it's just that the system that they created is still running through, but it's Africans, Kenyans that are running it? Or do they still have a lot of power on Kenya? Like, where is that balance compared to like West African countries where the French still have a lot of power?
Okay, very interesting question. There's a lady by the name Arikana Chiombore Kwao who talks about this, very deeply. I mean, of course, I am not, I've read about West African history, I'm not very familiar with it, but I know one major difference between the French and British colonialism is that there was kind of like a cultural colonialism. I don't know whether we have any West African brothers and sisters here. We always make fun of each other. So sometimes when you hear like maybe someone from Ivory Coast or maybe even Cameroon, one of those French speaking countries in West Africa, when they hear you speaking French, they will tell you, oh, you're speaking my language. But funny enough, in East Africa, when someone is speaking English, despite the fact that, you know, Kenyans have very good English, a Kenyan will never ever tell you that you are speaking my language. So this is a difference in the way the colonization was done, because there was not only cultural, but I think also the currency. The French were controlling the currency. They were controlling the education system after colonization. They were controlling minerals. They were controlling the military. So the pact, there was kind of like a pact for the continuation of colonization that was signed. Those that resisted, the French destroyed everything that they had created as a warning to the other countries. There's very few, you know, like West African countries from my own collection where you'll find them talking to each other in an African language. So the Senegalese are an example of West Africa, French West Africans who speak to each other in a local language. When you go to most countries like Ivorians, most Ivorians I know, and anyone feel free to correct me here, but most Ivorian friends I have, they tend to speak to each other in French, even within the same family, where maybe they come from the same ethnic group. They will still be speaking to each other in French. So I think there was a deeper impact with what the French did and what they continued to do. And that's the reason why you saw the Sahel states very recently, Burkina Faso, I think Niger, you know, like get to a point and tell the French, you guys gotta get out of here. You know, like we're gonna solve our own problems the way we have them, but you guys gotta get out of here. Let me let, you know, like Moftat also from Nairobi chime in on that, but there's a very interesting comparative studies that you'll find between the way the French colonized and the way the British did it. Moftat.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. And again, most of this kind of being my own personal reflections is not authoritative in any way. But my understanding, by the way, two interesting contrasts in my view. One is that most of the West African states, including those under British but also under French, had indirect rule, meaning that the colonizers came in and they identified some figureheads that then directed the instruction of governance. And then you had the direct rule, like we had here in Kenya and in Zimbabwe and so on, where you had the literal British authorities coming in all the way to your local headman, who is civil servant from Whitehall, you know, of the British system. And so to me, what that meant is that, interestingly, in some cultural way regarding food and music and clothing and so on, it kind of survived intact for a lot of West Africa. That did not survive as well for many East African, maybe some Southern African communities. So in some ways, they have a bit of a cultural identity that is a little bit more impact compared to what we had here in Kenya. So in my own Kikuyu community, we literally were a circumstance where our ancestors' lands were declared white highlands, and everybody was then taken to reserve lands, basically kind of like the res. You think of the reservation in North America, and that's exactly what happened here in central Kenya among other so-called white highlands. And what I meant is that people's cultures were ripped apart, right? In Kikuyu culture, for instance, a man had a hat, and usually it was polygamous, and had several hats for the wives, and a man never really had the nuclear family as we think of it today. It wasn't cultural to Kikuyu, but in these reservations, everybody was just stuffed in there together. And one big impact of a cultural identity there was very much disrupted. And so culturally, you find that at least here in Kenya or in several other of the settler colonies, you had that disruption of culture. But economically as well, the French particularly had that whole deal with, they made all the states sign that they will use the French system and the French central bank and all that. And to me, I think that has been pretty insidious and continues to really have the ripple effects of downturn for many of the countries. here in Kenya, we had a situation where many economic activities continued to be under the control of the British, including, very importantly, which is a big forex exchange earner. For many, many years, it was still in the hands of a lot of British operators. Some of the minerals that we have to this day, like Lake Magadi here with soda ash, has had a lot of British ownership and control. But I believe that in some ways, economically and even in terms of just national pride, I believe many with the Gen Zs as we see an emerging new pride and new identity of who we are, based on seeking economic freedom and cultural pride, which for many years was heavily undermined and discounted. I don't know whether Milton has a comment as well.
Certainly, and I think I want to answer the question straight. There's a lot of control in our leadership, politically, economically, and even socially. You see, for example, why do we still have if we are having elections, and you will see this, you saw that last time, that they have created this, the imperialists have created this system where they identify the two, they told us it is a two-horse race, so the two-horse race, and they pick the two top horses, then they invite them to Chatham House where they have to speak and they get asked a few questions, and that is where it has been happening for the last, I think, since 2013. It has become more pronounced since 2013 with the era of new media and all that. Kenyans have become more aware. But from 1992, you remember, when Matiba was invited to the UK and coming back home, you know how that was done to split the Kikuyu vote and all that. So there is that control. So there is no independence. Number two, why? The structural adjustments by the World Bank and the Bretton Woods institutions of the late 80s and early 90s that have put us into the kind of problem that we have in terms of national debt. For instance, and I keep asking, why does IMF, for instance, here in DC, or the World Bank have to tell us how to structure our tax regime and tell us that for you to benefit from this loan or the other, then you have to tax your people like this, you have to sack so many number of people from the public service and all that. So those are manifestations of the control that we're talking about. And a lot of these people will tell you, for instance, after the Gen Z movement, commemoration of June 25th, we have seen the current head of state, where was he summoned to? I have my friend Mumbe Seraki who says he has been summoned. And I mean, that is just the way it is. So there's a lot of interference. We still have these military bases in our country. Think about Laikipia and that vast land. We have the British Army that is responsible for human rights abuses in scales that you cannot imagine. How many quote-unquote pointy children we have in that part of the country that don't even know their fathers, who have refused to...
pointy, not many people will know.
Yeah,
pointy.
so, I mean, these are children born of British soldiers and Kenyan women in that part of the country where this is where they are testing all their weapons. They cannot do it in their own country. They have to come to Africa and do it in our country because of the money that they give. It is not a lot, by the way, if you think about it. But our leadership is being held at ransom because of that little money that comes. The other thing is, when we talk about proceeds of corruption and bad governance in our country, why do we still have those tax haven jurisdictions where they steal money from us, they go hide that money in those jurisdictions, and when we say we want to follow the proceeds of crime, they say, oh, you cannot touch. That money has already got into our jurisdiction, so you cannot move it. Those are the kinds of injustices that continue to play out in this day and age, including printing money. For example, why do we have to print our currency in some funny country? And you're told that our companies do not have the capacity. We are running an election system, they bring money, they tell us, oh, you cannot do it this way, you don't have the capacity. They have to give you some funny companies and tell you that those are the only ones with the capacity, and we end up with the most expensive election in the world. Those are the kinds of things I'm talking about, and there are several of them. They tell us the system of education, our system up to Form 4, that is 12th grade, is inferior. They tell you, for you to qualify into this international system, they have the international school system that they tell you, if you make some little money, you're on the higher side of the middle class. If you don't have your child in the international schools, then you've not made it. I mean, that is the kind of brainwash and bastardization of our own systems that we still have to live with and we have to break out of.
All right. There was another question here, but real quick before that, before she asks a question, you brought up a very important point. You mentioned the IMF and the World Bank. Last year, when we were protesting after the Gen Z revolt, one of the places where we took our protests was the IMF. And it wasn't because it's just a nice, cozy place to take a protest. It's because the IMF has direct blood in their hands to the 60 Kenyans, to the 60 young Kenyans who were killed because the finance bill that they were protesting was based on recommendations that came from the International Monetary Fund. And that's why we took it there. And that's why I think, as Americans, you also have to understand that your taxpayer dollars are being used to subjugate people in other parts of the world for the benefit of very few people. Let's go ahead and hear your question. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that last point, because it leads right into the questions that I'm going to raise. Good evening, Dr. Maya Cunningham from American University. A few questions for the panel. So, hearing the system of colonialism or the colonization system that the British imposed, it's just quite a similar story, obviously, to the way they imposed in Zimbabwe. The hut tax, same thing in Botswana. You know, forced removals, reservations, same thing in Zim, same thing in South Africa. So I think I just would, first question is, I wonder if it would be beneficial to think about the story of colonialism in Kenya in terms of the way it has happened throughout the continent. And is there a way then to create alliances of decolonization with those who've been subjected to the same systems? That's one. Is there a discussion in the public conversation in the 625 movement and other liberation arenas in Kenya concerning land expropriation? Not, of course, in the way that it was done in Zimbabwe, right? But the fact that it was done, right? And the fact that there's a conversation in South Africa, if, you know, this is indigenous land, Africa for Africans, you know, so is that happening? And then you mentioned issues with miseducation in the Kenyan education system. Is it possible then that some law or something can be passed so that young people can be educated in the actual history of the country? Can that happen, or are there efforts for that to happen? Thank you.
Wow, those are very deep questions that need another full session, the Sankofa Cafe.
Try.
Yes, those are very deep questions. So regarding, you know, like Africans getting to know about their colonial history and decolonization, the internet has kind of democratized information. So now you have a lot of pockets of people who are coming in contact with information that is very mind-blowing for the very first time. Because we inherited a system of education that really made it seem, because if I recall my education, you know, like about history, both from primary school, which is the equivalent of elementary and middle school here, and high school, they were very nice stories. Like, these were very nice people. The Portuguese, they just came to explore. You know, like, that's the perception that I had. I never, you know, like, I never really saw, and I don't know, and I think other Kenyans can speak of their experience from the education they got from school. It was kind of like a very softened and nice narrative that these were just people that they came and then, you know, like, they felt like it was time and then they left. And that narrative continued, but I think starting from maybe the mid-2000s with the advent of the internet, people started reading, coming into contact with documents, declassified documents from the CIA, declassified documents from London, revealing a lot of information. And for the first time in history, black people across the entire world are talking to each other. This has never happened, not since slavery, not since colonization. It's happening for the first time, and it's leaving, you know, like, people who are into white supremacy in jitters. You know, like, African Americans are coming and settling in Nairobi, and they're like, I think I like this place. These are nice people. This is not what I was told about Africa when I was in school. We're seeing a lot of African Americans settling in Ghana, and we are seeing these interactions happening, maybe not at the pace that we want. You asked another very important question: can a law be created to make this happen? And unfortunately, speaking from the Kenyan perspective, I don't think we have the right set of people. The people who are there right now have a vested interest in things staying the way they are. So this will have to happen from outside of the education system, and it's already happening in sessions like this, in sessions happening in Kenya. This colonial history is so recent that people who are tortured by the British, some of them are still alive until today. And they're now getting platforms to tell their stories. You know, like some of these documentaries that have been recommended here, the books that have been written, it's not happening at the pace that we want, but there's a consciousness and there's an awareness, and even to those who are not very well read, they have that consciousness that there's something clearly not right, especially with the education system. And unfortunately, right now, the education system, there's a new system being introduced in Kenya, which I'm still trying to understand, which is even worse than what we previously had. Yeah, so these are certain things, and that's part of the reason why these young people are going out on the streets, because they're at a point where they're like, if you want to kill us, you can kill us. We have nothing to lose. There's nothing worse when you're educated, you have a college degree, but you have no opportunity, not because the country is poor, but just because there's some systems that have been inherited from the colonizers that have benefited a very small subset of people at the cost of a lot of people who are suffering. I think I'm going to let Milton address some of the other, because I said your question has so much depth. I think we need to organize another session just based on that. Milton.
I've seen you've asked for the mic back. Did you want to add something?
No, I was going to have you answer.
Okay. Let me begin with your first question, which is very deep, and Ali has tried to delve into it. Do we have need for any, legislation or policies that need to go into it? We don't have the capacity in terms of legislative ideas by those who have got the privilege of exercising legislative power on behalf of the people. They are gatekeepers. They have no spine, no mind or brain of their own. They don't even represent the people. Those people are tone deaf, And if there was a way that we could get the 357 of them out of that house and get a new set of people, including those 1,450 of them at the county assemblies, we would gladly do that. We do not have that capacity. Expropriation of land, that has been a very, very thorny issue. I know Julius Malema in South Africa has been very, very vocal about it, and he adds expropriation without compensation. And we had this conversation after the new constitution came into place, and we had this lengthy conversation. Do we have 99 or 999-year-old leases? And we have the National Land Commission that came into place, then the Land Act of 2012 and 2016 law that was enacted. And I think as a country and as a people, we've not delved into the depth of that question. There's a lot of glossing over. There was the Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission report of 2013, I believe, which made certain recommendations, and the government was asked, and it was recommended, and I think President Uhuru Kenyatta's regime did allocate 10 billion shillings. That's about, how in dollars, I can't quickly think of the number. $100 million for purposes of compensating those families, including the freedom fighters who were never compensated. That is still somewhere hanging. It is something that I believe the current discourse needs to address. And so we are there. Are there families that deserve to be compensated? We've seen some level of tokenism by successive regimes, handing out title deeds for pieces of land that don't even make sense. 40 by 80 pieces of land. I mean, it's all a mockery to what injustice and atrocities were committed. So that is a conversation that we need to have in a deeper conversation. My classmate chairs one of the tribunals that deals with land acquisition, and we always laugh about what they are talking about in terms of compensating people that lost their land and continue to do so. The last question about the education system, do we need to change the education system? Certainly yes. Do we have the right motivation in the present circumstances in terms of why we need to change the system? Absolutely not. We have rent-seeking and interests of a few people at the center of the clamor for that change. I do believe that it is through conversations like this that we can then entrench the need for that change to become more meaningful, where our people are encouraged to pursue knowledge rather than the formalization of education, as it were, as a system of academic progress and excellence. That is what we need to inculcate. Why do people go to school, for example? You had the impeached deputy president at some point saying that we have 60 to 70% of people in public service whose academic credentials cannot be ascertained, because we have a system of governance where that promotes, just as long as you bring an academic certificate, then you get a promotion. And we have ended up, and I worked in the civil service until 2012, and I know people have degrees from universities whose name they cannot pronounce. And it is because of that. So are people seeking education because they want to acquire knowledge? I don't think so. That is where we need to move our conversation to.
Yes, I'm going to give Moftat a chance for a brief minute also to react to that. But real quick, I want to add to what Milton said. And this is how all these things are interrelated. We were having a conversation recently regarding education, because education was a big issue in parliament, in the Kenyan parliament recently, because they wanted to reduce the capitation or the amount they give per student, because remember, former President Mwai Kibaki did a very good job of introducing free education, primary, and then it was moved to secondary. But now they want to reduce the amount they give per head, per child to education, and it caused quite a big uproar. So just to give some, like some numbers to understand, I graduated high school very many years ago. Now, when I graduated high school, that year when I graduated, I can't remember how much the dollar was. That 1 year of education, my final year of high school, I paid 40,000 shillings. Let's call it $400. Let's just assume the dollar is at $100, just for you to get the magnitude. So let's call it $400 a year. So today, what the government is offering per student, like more than 20 years later, is 22,000. It's about half.
No, they reduced that to 16.
So they reduced it to 16. And this is more than 20 years later. So when we convert that amount, when we include inflation, for someone to get the same quality of education that I did, they need about 120,000, which is like, we're talking like 5-6 times the amount that's being offered. So that tells you the quality of education. So this is, the education is moving from a public to a private good. Very many people who are very rich today and came from rich families attended public schools. Like most people who went to school in the 80s, even in the 90s, back to the 70s, they attended public schools, just like a lot of rich people here attend public schools. But now, poor people are now opting to take their children to private school, spending sometimes 60-70% of their income on education for their children. I'm going to let Moftat speak, and then we're going to come to Jeff Kalulu for the next question. Moftat.
Yeah, thank you. And I think the questioner's inquiry has been very well addressed. I do have a quick comment about some of the elements regarding cross-learning, because indeed the colonial experience has similar impacts across multiple countries. And unfortunately, we've not been able to really find ways to optimize the learning and even in a way customize the learning to our particular context. First of all, I do think that we cannot continue looking at 19th and 20th century kind of learning and systems, which were basically developed in an industrial age where we want to get factory workers and obedient workers to drive industrialization. In Europe, we have to think about 21st century and how we will customize our needs on this continent based on some of our own ethos as Africans, including things like apprenticeships, so that we are really teaching people and our kids and our youngsters the skills that they will kind of need in this future economy. So we really have to leapfrog a lot of the typical ways that we've kind of been dealing with education. But in terms of exchanging ideas and learnings, I feel that there are some really good examples, for instance, regarding, and this is not necessarily a colonial question, the way that the Rwanda genocide reconciliation and history and analysis and understanding came around, including how they did the court system in Rwanda is very, very interesting. The way that they did the tribunals to address some of the post-apartheid experiences is very, very interesting. I think that there are a lot of traumas that were sort of imposed on our peoples during the colonial period that have never really been addressed. And I feel like some of the lessons and approaches that different countries have had to address some of these historic traumas are very, very important and need to be looked at in this next generation. And to me, I feel one of the ways we do that is also through language. Of course, here we are speaking English, and English is indeed the sort of the lingua franca of the world. But we all have languages, and unfortunately, for the longest time here across Africa, we were divided by languages again. Lusophone, Francophone, Anglophone, and so we don't sufficiently talk to each other necessarily, even very close borders. just because of language. And finally, the African Union and some of our regional blocs, whether it's East African Community or SADC or ECOWAS, they all have these cultural and education and economic kind of policies and ideas, which are often talked about at a very high level, and we don't sufficiently see local to subnational level action to really enforce outcomes that are really transformative for our peoples. And I feel like that's one of the areas where we really need to invest and look at people peer-to-peer learning. And I think to Ali's point about the digital space we occupy these days, our youngsters and even everybody, all our elderly as well, everybody can talk to everybody everywhere. You know, I think Ali in some preparation discussion said, imagine what it would have been if Mwalimu Julius Nyerere could WhatsApp Nkrumah, right? Back in the 60s. But this is exactly what we have now. And I think the ideas, and even such a forum as this today, where we are discussing this thing across, yes, the country of Kenya, but also across Africa and across the world. We need to find solutions to think about how we will address important problems and face the future in new ways. Over.
Okay, all right, thank you so much. You know, the good people at Sankofa, you know, like we're almost running out of time. So I think we're gonna have a quick comment from Val, and then Mr. Kaludi there has a question, and then we're gonna wrap it. And I know there's also one other question. I think we're gonna take the last round of questions, and then we wrap up so that we do not overstay our welcome at this very sacred space that we're given by the people at Sankofa.
So you asked a question about like the role of movements like the 625 movement. Yes, so one of the ideas that we've been working on and that we are trying to get out there is first the information, because the system of education in Kenya does not teach critical thinking. It's more of a follower mindset. So that's why there is right now with the Gen Z protest, where when we young people question leadership, they don't understand it. When we question religious leaders, they don't understand it. When we question our parents, they don't understand it. So getting that information out is first. Then after that, through maybe having had this discussion with Haile and the team yesterday, having like a digital library, and also having more people come into spaces like this. And then hopefully when we get there, we can, you know, have crossed the border into, you know, getting justice for also the Mau Mau and everything that you asked. Yeah, pass it to you.
Okay. Thank you so much. Allow me to stand. My name is Dr. Jeff Kaluyu. Some of you may have heard my name or not, and I want to embarrass Ali. He was my student sometime. You know, I will always embarrass you. Doc, we met at Kashagwa's meeting, so, and thank you so much, Valentine, for inviting me. And Joy, you are it. You know I'm a professor, so please excuse me. Excuse me for my tone and all that. So I want to be a member of 625, no question about that. And whether you accept me or not, I will be in. Gen Z, I just want to make a comment more than just a question, because we are given an option of asking or commenting. So I'm more on the commenting side a little bit. You know, there are direct actions that I think Gen Z, because I was a presidential candidate, 2017, if you do remember, ranked third in the, even though I was independent, ranked third in the second election. And I was very proud. 2022, I saw how it was going, and there was no need of running because they wanted to take it by force, by fire. And that's how it went. But 2022, we are there, and of course, I seek your, definitely your support. But as I said, and I had a little conversation with Valentine when I was seeking, I really forced her to almost to invite me here. And I wanted to mention that even though activism is very important in changing the course of a nation, but also being inside is very important. Because if you think of people like Martha Karua, they have a political party, and they are also famous activists. So not only you change the course of Kenya by giving great ideas that you have given, I've learned a lot. Even I thought I knew something as a PhD and as a politician of Kenya, but today I learned quite a little bit more. The presentation was as clear as Alaska in the summer, so there's no need of repeating that. Now, direct activism, which I really respect, and the Gen Zs have done a lot of good work in terms of like resisting bad bills, but there is a subconscious activism or effect that is happening. You remember an average African youth is 19.5 years of age, 19.5. An average president in Africa is 62.5. Can you imagine 62-year-old leading a 19-year-old? They will not understand each other. If you take the top 10 oldest presidents in Africa, the average age is 82 years. And if you take advanced countries like United States and other countries, the average president is 52 years of age. So it is easier 52 to lead maybe 25 years old because ours are a little younger than a 62 to lead 18. Well, some are older, some we are talking of an average. So we need to address the way, the mode of understanding between all the differences. The only thing they can do is mentor the young people. And I believe the people who can mentor the young people is people who have been outside seeing different systems, but not people who have been in there telling people what to do in there. No, the Gen Zs will tell them more than they understand because of the current world. So I think diaspora, you have a big role in trying to mentor, guide, and teach the young people. Education system, I feel like people are telling me, when you become the president in 2027, what are you going to do about it? When it comes to education, as a university dean, as I've written a couple of books, and also as a professor, trust me, I have written a lot of curriculums. I know the education system doesn't work now. 16,000 Kenya shillings per student now is not even enough, even though they have budgeted for 22 and they are saying they have no money. So what are we going to do? You said we need more a whole session of this in order to be able to say what is happening in classes with the CBC right now. They don't even know where they are going. Class 9, going to secondary, they don't even know what they are supposed to do. I can tell you that. I'm on the ground. I can assure you that. Most opposition, I can tell you in Kenya, they are just opposite. And I'm not afraid to say that. We are not going to mention names, as he has led me to, we're not going to mention names. But some of them, they were saying exact opposite of what they are saying now. When they are in government, they were saying opposite. I think they have misinterpreted the word opposition, like to say the opposite. Okay. Now, when they are outside, they are saying opposite of what they were saying. And that is unacceptable. I do believe the people who lead Kenya will be from outside the system, and the outside the system will mean Gen Z, and it will mean people from diaspora, not people who have been on the system throughout. And to finish, okay, I want to loud off what the doctor has just said. They create the two-horse race intentionally so that they can achieve 51%, and therefore a little group run to be opposition, and they call them, we are the opposition, and only opposition is Matiang'i, Gachagua, Karua, and nobody else. The rest of us, we are not mentioned. So the media is manipulated. So the whole thing is to make what is calling the gatekeeping of certain people. So I want to say, if you're here, you're diaspora, please join UCP. We are going to give you a platform so that you can run for office. Whether you're in diaspora, you don't have to stay in Kenya full time. And also Gen Z are not given a platform by opposition, and therefore we are giving them the platform of UCP plus Dr. Kaluyu Foundation, which I have created.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Jeff Kaluyu. I know the people at Sankofa want to close. Sheila has one quick comment to make, and then we're gonna call it a night. Yeah, so just give Sheila right back there has one quick comment or question, and then we're gonna call it a night so that we can come back here again.
Yeah.
We don't want to overstay our welcome.
Yeah, I'll stand so you can see me. So I wanted you to, I don't know if you have time, but let's think about tribalism, because it's my belief that the Dedan Kimathi generation, they knew what they were fighting because the goals were clearly outlined. It was for the white man to go. If you know what Mau Mau stands for, it stands for the white man should go so that the African can be liberated. But today we don't know what our liberation looks like. And I think part of our liberation as a generation will be to be liberated from tribalism. And I think Val started a very interesting conversation when she criticized the former deputy president for being a tribal leader, was that, and you've said this today, that there are people who don't want the system to change because they benefit from that system. And the way Kenyan politicians today get elected or in coalitions is how many people, how many numbers do you bring? And that leaves people with values out of the conversation and incentivizes people not to even have values. Because we've seen in the last month, the government of Kenya is spending about $1 million every week to do quote unquote empowerment campaigns, where they go and have a rally somewhere, usually in the Mount Kenya region, and they just dish out money. But that money was not budgeted for in the 2025-2026 budget. So it's money that's been stolen. We've talked about education. We're not finding money for education. It was budgeted, but there's no money. We're not finding money for health. It was budgeted, but there's no money. So they take that money for the education and for the health that they should be doing across the country, and they use it in quote-unquote empowerment sessions in Mount Kenya region, and they rob the whole country to bribe Mount Kenya because the deputy president they impeached is from Mount Kenya. Wow. So if we can think about tribalism as the enemy, the way the Dedan Kimathi generation thought about the white man as the enemy, and of course we have to add other isms. But if we can conceptualize that tribalism that locks us with a handful of, if you notice who runs for president in like the last 30 or so years, it's just handful of people from a handful of tribes. And it's locking out competence. We say the system is allergic to competence. It's locking out competence and reiterating what the colonialist was doing with tribe. And they don't want the system to change. And that is why they keep us in the system. And the deputy president, former deputy president, will actually defend himself for being a tribalist. So if we could think about that too.
Okay, oh, amazing, an amazing way to close tonight. A big hand for Sheila. Yeah, so tribalism, yeah, so tribalism is one of those last elephants in the room that the colonizers left us with that has been hamstringing us for, we're now approaching, are we at 60, are we at 70 years? We're at 60 something years, but still hamstrings us today. And to close this, I want people, you know, like especially people here in America, to think of what the colonizer made people who previously got along. They put them into tribes. Think of the Washington Commanders and the Dallas Cowboys. But this is a sport. So it's okay to hate each other in a sport. But I think in Kenyan politics, people have been groomed to look at it as a sport. So even if your tribesman happens to be the most useless and incompetent person, and the other person is the one who has a track record of doing a good job, you will be like, this is, you know, like a member of my team, I have to choose him. And that's why, you know, like there are people who want the system to stay the way it is, from the education system to the political system that we have that benefits very few. I'm gonna give you 1 minute. Let me start with Moftat, and then I'm gonna come to Milton, and then I'll have Val give the closing remarks.
Thank you very much. Yes, what a joy to have participated in this, and I hope that this is just another opportunity to open up conversations. I actually was talking to a friend today, and there's a group here called, I had never heard of it before, it's called Soma Nami, and it's a group of people who try to read and discuss African writers and African issues. And I feel it's long overdue for Africans and the African diaspora, in conjunction with all our other friends all over Europe, in North America, in Asia, everywhere, to really unpack and resolve our own problems that we face through this kind of a forum. And thank you very much to Sankofa team and all the organizers, Joy and Valentine and everybody. Thank you to co-panelists as well. Thank you.
Milton. Give us a media minute. You're a media
Okay,
person.
yeah,
Your media minute is kind of constructed differently.
That is true. Because,
Yeah.
like I said, the activist in me, and there are many things. But let me say this. The Mau Mau generation gave us what we call independence today. I want to call upon those of us in the diaspora. Gen Z are our current Mau Mau generation. They need our support. There has been an attempt to bastardize what they are doing and infantilize them so that then they do not speak and question power for what it is. To those in the diaspora, I have 2 quick points to make. Number one, we have a responsibility to define or redefine, as it were, what the money aspect of political campaigns is. Because we know that people who run for office have no money to give the public. It is the other way around. That needs to change as we prepare for the next general election. Number two, like Dr. Kaluyu has said, those of you in the diaspora, please take advantage of your interest. They say that good people, that bad governance is a product of good people who refuse to offer themselves for power or positions. Please let us have as many of you as possible taking part. And lastly, if we can have greater participation of the diaspora in the electoral process, register yourself as a voter. Agitate for expanded spaces as polling stations in the diaspora, because if we don't do it, last election we had 3,000 or less taking part. If we have more, as many as we are eligible to vote, please let's come out and vote. If we don't, Kenya will remain a field of gatekeepers of the colonial era systems, because they benefit from the rent-seeking endeavors that they continue to do. God bless you all. Thank you very much, everyone. And I look forward to the next session if we can continue to speak.
Family, thank you for being here. One more time for our hosts and panelists, please. Thank you, thank you, thank you. This has been a very educational panel. I think we've all learned a lot. That said, there is a serious issue that Haile, the founder and owner of Sankofa and initiator of this evening's event, would like to address. Give it up for Haile Grima.
Well, I'm not sure it's a serious issue, but it's an